Welcome to Doug's Open Mic, a podcast spotlighting local musicians, bands, and songwriters.
Hi there, Doug's Open Mic, back again. This is episode number 3. For those of you that don't know, this is a podcast featuring local musicians, basically from the southeastern New England area. Think westerly, up to Boston, maybe out to Hartford, down to New Haven. We talk about the local music. We do original songs. We have songwriters come in. Sometimes we talk technical stuff, for you guitar guys that want to hear about some technical stuff about guitars and music and making music. Sometimes we talk about historical stuff. Westerly's got a great historical timeline of great musicians and places. Still does great places in Westerly. We'll get into that. We talk about the local music scene and maybe what, myself and the guests are kind of watching, listening to these days. And finally, the other thing we do is, I call it, for lack of a better word, making the sausage. We'll go into what it takes for budding musicians to go from the couch to the stage, and what's kind of going on out there behind the scenes that you might find interesting. It is kind of cool, I have to say. So for today, I have my good friend Craig Edwards, who's a local musician based over in Mystic, Connecticut. God, Craig and I go back so far. So introduce yourself, Craig, and say a few things.
So my name is Craig Edwards. I do live in Mystic, and I'm a professional musician, music teacher, ethnomusicologist. Had to choke that one out. And I've worked both as a touring musician and teacher of music. I teach traditional violin styles up at Wesleyan University. I teach out of my home on a number of instruments: fiddle, guitar, banjo, mandolin, button accordion. I've worked at Mystic Seaport on and off for many years, about over 3 decades now, and as part of the music staff there, but I've also put together recorded music backgrounds for a number of exhibits, both at Mystic Seaport and other museums. So that's another sort of line of work that I have. And have always been in love with sort of traditional American roots music since I was pretty small, and managed to cobble together a living doing music that follows that endeavor.
So also we have Ben Barber here, who's our technical guy, and he's always welcome to ask insightful questions, which he does.
Someday I'm going to get you to just use the word producer off the bat.
Oh, producer. That's right. It's producer.
It's okay.
And just to offer Craig about the music lessons, I took lessons for Craig for he's a great teacher. Oh my God, he's got the patience of Job. It's like you never felt like it was like, God, I can't get this. And it's like, no, just okay, hold on, we're gonna go in a little different direction here. That's fine. And also, he's the type of teacher. I classify music teachers into 2 categories. There's the one category where you go to the music teacher and they have a rigid lesson plan, and they're going to give you play guitar book number 1, and you're going to do scales and you're going to do things, and then when you get through that book, however long it takes, you go to book number 2, and then you go through the. Craig, on the other hand, goes with the, well, what do you want to learn? It's like, I mean, when I first started going to him, I was like, I want to learn this song. Okay, let's go. Here we go. So good to know. If you want to get in touch with him, at the end here, we'll give some, we'll do it now. Give some info if somebody wants to get a hold of you.
If you want to get a hold of me, you can email me at fiddlecraig@gmail.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me. fiddlecraig@gmail.com.
All right, then. So, in the way I like to do these shows, again, we'll just kind of talk about Craig's, I call it the early years. So, when did you start playing music? I think Didn't you grow up in Virginia? I'm kind of thinking.
Virginia, North Carolina. I was born in North Carolina. We spent most of my childhood in Virginia. The town of Stanton. And we moved there when I was in third grade. And at the time, and that was a long time ago. I'm ancient and crusty. You know, I was. So this is the early '70s. Well, no, late '60s. It was the late '60s when we moved there, and there was a great music scene among teenagers in Stanton. Stanton has a great park that was made by Frederick Law Olmsted, the same guy who made the park here in Westerly, and also Central Park. And it's a beautiful place that had a bandstand in the middle, and these high school rock bands would play there every weekend, and so I could go out there with my friends and hear these young musicians really tearing it up. There were some great players at that time. Another early spot that I did a lot of music was a coffee house called the Needle's Eye that was held in a church basement, and it was a all ages space, we'd call it now, but then it was just sort of a teenager coffee house, and it had a stage and a piano and a little bit of sound equipment, and all kinds of people would perform there. I learned from musicians in the community, and took a few guitar lessons here and there. I remember when I was given my first essay assignment in junior high school. I had been playing guitar for a few years, and I decided to write my essay on the history of the guitar in America. And that was the beginning of an exploration that has taken me where I've gotten to now. As I started to read interviews, you know, Guitar Player magazine was out then, and there were a bunch of books out about rock music and the history of rock music. It was a flowering of writing about rock in that period. You know, writers like Nick Cohn and Grail Marcus were writing for these magazines, trade magazines like Cream and Circus. Those were a couple of kind of teen fan magazines that gave some pretty serious interviews. It wasn't just the sort of boy band kind of interviews that you can get in those sorts of magazines. And Rolling Stone, of course. But as I started to do research on these guitar players, all of them were talking about listening to old recordings of blues players and early country music and old-time music. And I got curious about that and started to seek out recordings of people like Mississippi John Hurt and B.B. King and early fiddle bands, and started to be interested in playing other instruments than guitar and other styles than rock. And that trajectory took me where I ended up playing stuff that goes back into the 19th century. So
what did you come to Mystic about?
Came to Mystic right after I graduated from college, about a year actually after I graduated from college. I went to Wesleyan University up in Middletown, majored in music with a concentration in ethnomusicology, which is a complicated word for just looking at music in its cultural setting. That's all that really means. And looking at the relationship between music and culture. At the end of school, I was in a band. When I graduated, a couple people in the band were still in school, but we'd made a record, and we'd been getting some pretty cool work playing coffee houses and folk festivals and town greens and concerts, and so the band was doing okay. And I went on a tour actually of Nova Scotia and Cape Breton that summer as one of the musicians backing up a clogging group doing the mountain flatfoot style of dancing that was based in Hartford. They were called the Mountain Laurel Cloggers. And they arranged this tour of Nova Scotia and Cape Breton that took about, 4 or 5 weeks. So I went up there with them and drove around, played music every night with a great fiddler named Paul Woodale and my banjo-playing friend Amy Davis.
So at that time, were you guitar?
I was playing guitar on that tour, just starting to learn the fiddle. And when I got back from that, one of the people in the clogging team told me that a great way to have a flexible day job was to do substitute teaching. So I did that for about a year and a half, and kept playing with the band. And people in the band stuck around actually after school. So the next year we were still going, and I entered into another year of substitute teaching, getting pretty tired of it already. That's a hard row to hoe, you know. And I saw an ad for a job at Mystic Seaport Museum doing traditional music of sailors. And it also involved climbing up in the rig of the tall ships, setting sails, rowing whaleboats, doing other sorts of shipboard work as demonstrations, much of which in the middle of the 19th century was coordinated with songs called shanties. So I came down and took that job because it was actually a full-time job playing music and had benefits. And at the time, I was one of 3 staff musicians. So I had 2 days a week. Well, actually, I had 3 days a week just doing music, and then a couple days of the week doing the demonstrations, which I had to do also as a musician. And then in the wintertime, when the demonstrations didn't happen, I was in the tavern exhibit. There was no alcohol served. It was just an exhibit. But
See, I always like my...
That's a shame. That's a
I
shame.
always like my listeners to have alcohol.
Well, there you go. So I was in the tavern exhibit all winter long with my instruments and a coal stove. So I got paid to just sit there and practice a lot of the time, and then visitors would wander in, and I'd play some music and talk to them. And then for a while there were only 2 of us. One of the 3 musicians left, and there were only 2 of us. So I had 5 days a week just playing music all day for a couple of years, and that was a really important piece of my development. But continuing to play other styles of music as well, and the band I was in sort of morphed into 2 bands, one of which continued to play traditional Southern style string band music and some Irish music. But the second band, we'd been that clogging team I told you about had been hired to play at the Escaheg, Rhode Island Labor Day weekend festival that at that time was called the Cajun and Bluegrass Festival. And we came along to back them up, and there was a great roster of Cajun and Zydeco musicians from Louisiana playing on the main stage, and I was just smitten with that music. It was cool, rocking music that you could get people to couple dance to. So people will shy away sometimes from square dancing or contra dancing. It just seems a little too organized to them. But couple dancing, now that's cool. You can, and it's sexy and romantic. And especially this Cajun and Zydeco dancing is just great couple dancing. And I'd already started to play the button accordion because there was one at Mystic Seaport. So I started working on Cajun accordion, and within a few months, we had started playing Cajun music and just flowed right into a Cajun and Zydeco music revival and popularity that partly stemmed from movies like The Big Easy, which exposed a lot of people to that style of music. It meant that bands from Louisiana were touring all over the country and playing all kinds of venues. And there was a dance community that was initiated by this festival in Rhode Island, which has been around now for close to 40 years, I think.
That turned into the Rhythm and Roots?
That's now the Rhythm and Roots Festival in Ninigret, Rhode Island, still run by Chuck Wentworth, who was and is an incredible advocate for American roots music in this region. He also runs the Gray Fox Festival, which is a bluegrass and acoustic music festival. Just an extraordinary promoter and advocate for traditional music styles and social music styles and the blends of roots music that have been so influential, especially in the last 15 years in American popular music.
So that Cajun band, is that the one you're still kind of in?
That band originally was called the Swamp Cats.
Yeah.
And then there was a band down in North Carolina called the Swamp Cats, and as we started touring, they were all lawyers, so they wrote us a pretty scary letter. Said you have to change your name.
That's the worst situation.
We changed the name to the Zyda Cats. And there's a band
I think it's a better name, actually.
Well, I like the Swamp Cats better, but there's a band in California called the Zyda Cats, but they're in California.
And they don't have
so
lawyers.
they don't,
And they're probably not
They're not all
lawyers.
lawyers. So, and they use a K for cats. We just used the C. And that band was very active for many years. It's we've moved a little further apart. We don't play as regularly now, but we still do get together and play every now and then. The string band likewise continued for many years, and then as people moved apart, the personnel changed some, and eventually I was the only original member of the band left. But that I'm still playing with a string band that derives from that band, and we play old time music, string band blues, early country music, a little bit of Cajun music. We're called the Root Farmers.
Oh yeah, yep. Is Brian Slattery in that one?
Brian Slattery plays in that occasionally, yeah.
Oh man, he's so good.
Yes, he is. Great New Haven musician, New Haven area.
We'll have to get him. Plays the fretless banjo like you'd have to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
Backtracking a little bit, what was the year that you like that you said you had just gotten out of school and you were playing with the band and some of the people were still in school and you made an album? You made a record.
Yeah, that was 1983.
So what was the process of making a record like for a bunch of, kids just out of school, kids young adults in 1983? Cuz I imagine it's a lot more difficult than it is now.
Some things have changed. I mean, we're recording onto tape. And that's a big difference in some ways. Studios were more expensive because the tape process was and just the tape itself was expensive, and editing was, when you say cut and paste, they were taking a razor blade and cutting tape and pasting it. But all that being said, our music was very well rehearsed at that point, and for us it was mainly a process of just getting a good take live. We weren't overdubbing very much. We had a couple guest musicians come in, and we on one of our Irish, we did a couple of Irish medleys, and we had a concertina player named David Payton from Northwestern Connecticut come in and put concertina on tracks we'd already recorded. But that was just straight ahead overdubbing. It wasn't, didn't involve a whole lot of editing. And then the mixing process is really pretty similar to what you do today. So just because of the style of music that we're doing and the way that that you would want to approach it in the studio, we weren't going in and laying down one instrument, and then we didn't have drums, right? We didn't have drums or a click track.
Yeah,
it was a matter of really, when I was playing guitar in that band, two of us switched off on guitar. I'd play guitar while my friend Tom played mandolin, and then when he played guitar, I was on fiddle. And we had another fiddler and a banjo player, and the banjo player also played Irish flute and tin whistle. And she was when that band started doing the Cajun and Zydeco, she was the rubboard player. But backtracking a little, but the recording process was fairly straightforward in that regard. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. I just was interested in the differences between then and now.
We can return to this conversational fork later if you like, because there's some other interesting stuff I can talk about from much more recent.
Awesome.
So back to because I've heard Craig talk about this before, and I find it very interesting, is that the whole sea shanty thing. Explain to people how this whole sea shanty thing, what they were, because I don't think most people know.
There's a lot of myth surrounding and misinformation surrounding the songs that sailors called shanties and that the general public calls sea shanties. So I'll try to give a brief debunking and re-education about what a sea shanty is. there weren't songs that were sung on European or American ships coordinating music until about the 1820s or 30s. That tradition didn't exist before that, because from the time of Columbus up to the end of the Napoleonic Wars, merchant ships going to sea operated just like naval vessels. They carried cannons, they had huge crews, and therefore the work of sailing the ship, the techniques that the sailors used, were based on having a large number of hands to do anything. That situation happened because that's the whole period where European maritime powers are building empires, and they are therefore constantly at war. There's 300 years of warfare at sea. That's why there was so much piracy then, right? That's why the Pirates of the Caribbean thing happens, and why the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company, those organizations were quasi-military organizations. They were fighting each other. They were fighting, the enemy navies were fighting. After the Napoleonic Wars, that situation changes suddenly and completely. Merchant ships didn't have to carry cannon anymore. Therefore, they didn't need huge crews anymore. They also didn't need as many extremely experienced sailors to maneuver a ship in a naval battle. The number of men in the crew of a merchant ship in the 1820s is slashed by about 70%. All right, so if you'd had 100 men on your ship, that same ship with the same rig, the same weight of gear that you got to operate by hand, bringing up anchors, raising sails, bracing sails, doing all this strenuous work that takes a lot of strength and focused force, all of a sudden there aren't that many people to do it. And where in an early time you could throw 30 guys at a rope, they could pick it up and march down the deck with it to raise a big sail that might be hanging from a yard that weighs 2.5 tons and is 80 feet long. And you have to raise that yard 30 feet up the mast to stretch the sail out. Now you might only have 8 or 10 guys to do that same job, and they can't get it started by marching. They have to plant their feet far apart, drop their rear ends down, lean over their forward knee, get their hands as far out in front of them as they can, all standing in a row in that position along the line, and then in one big twitch, snap that line back, and then quickly move their hands forward, hand over hand up the line. So every time they get one of those big tugs on the line, they've concentrated all the force in the very beginning of the pull, and that yard, instead of getting dragged up, jumps with each pull. So it's a snap and swing, as one sailor called it. Coordinating that precisely was essential. You can do it by saying 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but that's not very inspiring. Fortunately for sailors, in that period, there were people from a cultural background that used song to coordinate work. That was not a European culture. Europeans don't do that because Europeans on land had draft animals, oxen and draft horses and mules. South of the Sahara Desert, there aren't any draft animals. You can't domesticate and train any species down there to do that kind of work. They don't have the right instincts. So humans south of the Sahara Desert had developed over millennia sophisticated ways of using music to coordinate effort. And it's more than just singing while you work. That's really important to understand. It's understanding exactly how the rhythm and the psychological inspiration and the melody interact so that when you infuse them into the work, it's supremely effective. So on the decks of these ships in the 1820s, where 20 to 25% of the workforce on American ships is African American, over and over you'd have these situations where people just weren't able to get the job started until somebody who knew how music worked to get that happening started singing, and the rest of the people on the line who knew how to responded. And that's how sea shanties are invented. The word shanty doesn't appear in print until the 1850s, and there is no detailed description of sailors doing that until the late 1830s. So
This is only our third episode, but that's the best story that's ever been told on this podcast so far. That was fantastic. So I just want to say, Doug and Craig, would you like to end this episode? First of all, Doug said before we got you, like last week, we were having a meeting about this, and he said, Craig's going to be great. We could probably get like 6 episodes out of him. And he's absolutely right. But would you like to play a shanty?
Oh, he hates shanties.
He hates shanties? Would you like to,
Oh boy!
well, that's not strictly true. I do hate being pegged as a sea shanty guy.
Right.
Let me talk very briefly about what happens after that.
Okay.
Which is that when folklore, the field of folklore at the end of the 19th century is a very nationalistic and ethnocentric endeavor.
Right.
British folklorists decided that because British sailors sang shanties, it must be an ancient British practice, despite the fact that they would admit in print that there's no documentary evidence of people singing on British ships before the 19th century.
Right.
That nationalistic view entered the
Zeitgeist.
zeitgeist, and folklorists throughout the 20th century characterized shanties as this sort of elbow-swinging British Isles thing, and everybody sings a shanty with an Irish accent, right? That's because the Clancy brothers sang shanties during the early folk revival.
Yep.
But in the 19th century, an Irishman would much more likely imitate the way he thought a black man was singing than the other way around. Right?
Oh. Okay.
So what I'll sing for you here are the two of the earliest songs that speak to this development. I'm going to sing you the earliest African American song that anybody has yet found that somebody wrote down both words and melody for in Western notation, 1832. The song is called Round the Corn Sally, and it was used to bring harvest into the barn. The second song I'll sing is also written down in the 1830s, not yet called a shanty, but from the very first full description of sailors singing on board a ship. So here's how that works. Hooray, hooray, ho, round the corn, Sally. Hooray for all the lovely ladies round the corn, Sally. Love's a thing that's bound to grab you round the corn, Sally. Hold you tight when once she have you round the corn, Sally. Old and ugly, young and pretty round the corn, Sally. You need not try when once love gets you round the corn, Sally. And here's the second one. Round the corner we will go, round the corner, Sally, around Cape Horn through the frost and snow. Round the corner, Sally, oh, when we roll around Cape Horn. Round the corner, Sally, you'll wish to God you'd never been born. Round the corner, Sally, oh, haul away and make your pay. Round the corner, Sally, let's get this yard hauled up today. Round the corner, Sally, it's one more pull and that will do. Round the high enough, which is the command you'd hear at the end of that song. So you can hear how the second song derives from the first.
Yeah.
So on the shanties, too, there's another thing that, again, part of the show, we're going to tell people little things that are around this area that people probably don't know about. Once a year at the Old German Club in Mystic, they have that sea shanty get-together.
Well, there's one, it's the first weekend in January, that is a fundraiser for the annual Sea Music Festival that happens at Mystic Seaport, which just happened actually the last 2 weekends ago. Well, so yeah, 2 weekends ago at this point. So the second weekend in June, second full weekend in June. And we bring performers from all over the world, from indigenous cultures. We've had people who still do small boat whaling in the old style from the Western Caribbean and sing rowing songs. We've had Inuit people who do whaling. We've had people from Brittany and Japan and all kinds of places, as well as European other European traditions. And then, of course, people who do sort of historic recreations of the 19th century shanties. And so that festival also has songs at what's called the German Club or the Frosan Social Hall on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night of that weekend. And you'll have 150, 180 people in that room.
Oh, it's amazing.
About 120 of whom are really good singers. And anybody can get up and lead a call and response song, and that whole room will raise the chorus, and it's astonishing.
All right. I think that's it. That's it for this will be episode number 3. We're not finished with Craig, so episode 4 will be forthcoming. Until then, everybody, have fun.